Hey guys, it's Joel from guntoter.org. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be kicking off a series on communications and communications gear. Now, before we get into that, if you go down in the corner, hit like, hit share, hit subscribe, and set up your notifications. And if you could also go down into the description, check out our Patreon page, and if you could support us, that would be awesome. Everything we do here, we do pay for ourselves. We don't get anything for free, and we do that because we want to give you the most bias-free, most useful reviews that we can. And that does get expensive, so if you can help us offset some of that, that would be awesome. Now, I've had a lot of questions about radio gear, like what gear should I get? Things like antennas, antenna relocation kits, questions about radios themselves, like which radios should I be looking at, radio pouches. I obviously did a whole series on those. But before I started to dive into some of the gear side of things, what I really wanted to talk about was a little bit of the foundational stuff first. Now, the two big questions being, why do we care about comms, and why do we tend to focus very hard on radios themselves when we talk about comms? So to address kind of the first question, why do we care about comms? It's because in a disaster scenario, or an end of the world scenario, or whatever it is you're preparing for, comms is going to be critical. Information is very limited in its usefulness if it isn't shared and incorporated into some sort of decision-making process, whether that is assessing damage after a storm, passing that information up to someone who can then prioritize and get teams out to work the damage based on that priority, or whether it's, again, an end of the world scenario, you're scouting out looking for food or something, and there's got to be a way to communicate that back, because you find a supply of food, water, whatever, that you can't carry by yourself. So you can either sit there and do tons of runs back and forth, or you can communicate that information and then you can get some sort of help, which obviously is going to make the work a lot easier. So in any sort of scenario that you might be preparing for, communications is going to be a key. That information flow is going to be key, whether it's prioritizing, or whether it's directing, or whatever the case may be. Even if it's just letting people know that you're safe and what's going on, communications and information flow is going to be a critical part of any response. So with that said, on the why do we care about comm side, why do we focus so hard on radios? Obviously, cell phones everyone's got one, right? Like they're everywhere. Everyone's got a cell phone. That's what people are used to communicating with. So why do we focus on essentially older tech in the form of radios? Well, for one thing, I don't really have to teach anyone how to use a cell phone, right? Like, I could probably hand a cell phone to a child and they can figure out one way or the other how to run the cell phone. I can also, just about anyone that I run into in a disaster scenario is going to know how to run a phone. I don't need to train them on how to use a phone. As opposed to radios, where people are just not as familiar with radios. Not anymore, right? Unless you've been in military, first responder, or some other, it's a hobby, you're amateur radio. People just aren't as familiar with how a radio runs, and kind of some of the protocol to deal with that. So that's kind of why I think there's not a lot of talk about cell phones and more talk about radios. The other side to that, and this is really kind of the more critical piece, cell phones require a lot of infrastructure to actually run, right? You've got to have a lot of power, you've got to have towers, because cell phones don't call each other, right? The signal from a cell phone goes to a tower and then is relayed to whoever you're trying to call. And that could be relayed over the air if they're on like the same tower, or it could go and flow through the backbone until it reaches another tower and then reaches the other phone. But you have to have that infrastructure. If you don't have the towers, the electricity, and the backbone, cell service doesn't work. And I've seen cell service fail several times in disaster scenarios, all the way back to when I first joined the Coast Guard, and it was literally the very first disaster I was ever involved in, and cell phones went down before the hurricane even got there. Too many people trying to communicate overloaded the towers went down, and you could not make a phone call. And this was, again, before the hurricane ever even got there. It's like a day or two before the hurricane even got there. So I've seen cell phones and cell towers fail just from overuse or panic. And when you incorporate in a tornado, an earthquake, a hurricane, something that can take down the towers, can sever that backbone, it's going to be awesome if cell phones work in the aftermath, but you can't have cell phones as your only method of communication in the aftermath. The reason we focus a lot on radios is they essentially make their own backbone, right? As long as you have batteries for your handheld, you can build an infrastructure, whether that's physical relays, portable repeaters. There's any number of ways that you can build up your own communication system using stuff that you can throw in a backpack. You don't need a huge tower. You don't need the internet backbone. You don't need any of that. You can basically pack in what you need, set it up, run it, and then move it if needed, or pack it out when the disaster's over. There's not this huge investment in physical structures and so on. So that's one of the reasons why radios are such a key component of any response plan, especially handheld radios like the ones that you would go buy off of Amazon. Obviously the Baofeng's are probably one of the ones that get talked about the most. There's a lot of other ones out there. And honestly, if you get really into radios and get into some of the crazy stuff that the amateur guys are doing, there's an amazing amount of stuff that they can do, from talking locally to setting up a mesh network to bouncing signals off of satellites, the space station, the ionosphere, you name it. They can do all sorts of crazy stuff, again, with radios that you can pack in a backpack and require nothing other than really batteries and some solar power. So a radio, despite being old tech, right, is a huge asset in a disaster response scenario. So hopefully that answers the first of the two questions that we're going to cover kind of in this backgrounder. That is, why do we care about comms? Because we want information flow, because with information flow comes better decisions. Typically, the military can foil that occasionally, but typically with more information comes better decision making. And then second, why do we care about radios? Because I can pack in a radio, I can build my own communications infrastructure, and I don't need the physical infrastructure that you would typically need for the communication that people are used to, which is like your cell phone and your internet. So it's scalable, it's portable, and it works. It's old, but it works. So that's why we care about that. In our next video, we're gonna get a little bit more into some of the radio frequencies as far as what we are allowed to use from a licensed and non-licensed view, and some of my opinions on kind of where we should be looking as we are doing that prepping. But that will be coming in a future video. So hope this kind of backgrounder was useful. Again, this is a kickoff. I'm really hoping this is going to be kind of a long-running series, covering everything from, again, the theory to kind of the practical things and some of the cool guy stuff, putting it on your kit and doing all that fun stuff. If you have comments, if you have questions, if you have suggestions, head down in the comments, hit me up. I do read them, I do respond to them, and I do get ideas from them. Also, if you have insight, like if you're a ham radio guy, or if you have been experimenting already with radios as part of your preparedness, we'd love to hear your experience as well. So go ahead and head down there. Again, like, share, subscribe, set up your notifications, and if you can help us out through our Patreon page with some of this gear that we're going to be buying to talk to you about, that would be awesome. We can't do this without you, and honestly, without you here, it's just me talking on the internet. No one wants to hear that. So thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.